people that are quote unquote 100% fluent are not necessarily good communicators, right? You could think of tons and tons of people who are fluent and they aren't good communicators. Well, I personally, knowing a lot of people who stutter and stutter boldly and stutter actively in their speech, I know tons of people like that that are very powerful communicators. Like, they will move audiences with their speech.
Welcome to Some Stutter Law, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering. My name is Greg O'Grady, and I'm the chair of the Newfoundland and Labrador Stuttering Association and a co-host of Some Stutter Law, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering, along with my co-host.
And I'm Katelyn Mayo. I'm a student and an aspiring speech language pathologist, and I'm Greg's co-host on the podcast Some Stutter Law.
Some Stutter Law mission is dismantling and rebuilding stuttering. Let's start listening. Some Stutter Law mandate is, in the spirit of Newfoundland and Labrador humor, robust and frank interactive discussions, Some Stutter Law podcast aims to rebuild confidence and hope for today's and tomorrow's persons who happen to stutter by dismantling stuttering myths, stigma, stereotypes, and barriers.
The objectives of Some Stutter Law podcast are supporting, raising awareness, and increasing understanding and acceptance of stuttering, providing people who stutter, their families, professionals, students, and the general public with current information, research, and resources about stuttering, and promoting the NLSA mission of advocacy and support for people who stutter.
I am pleased to have with us today John Gomez. John is a speech language pathologist, and he's also a film producer. John's first feature film is When I Stutter, which premiered at the Cleveland International Film Festival in April of 2017. When I Stutter has been admired for its ability to effectively raise awareness about people who stutter and their challenges in life. The film has won 7 awards, been an official selection in over 15 film festivals, with over 100 screenings worldwide. In 2017, John was honored with the Emerging Filmmaker Award from the prestigious Sheridan Documentary Film Festival. John, so on behalf of Some Stutter Law podcast, we would like to formally welcome you to our podcast this morning. So John, as in the Newfoundland Labrador Stuttering Association recently had a virtual conference, and you had presented the film When I Stutter. It is an excellent film, John, and it really sort of hits home to the emotional component and the challenges of people who stutter. And so the feedback from the audience present was excellent. And so, John, what made you decide to make this film?
Well, first, I want to just thank you for having me on today. It's a big honor to be on your podcast, and it was a pleasure to present my film to you at your online convention. What inspired me to make the film was, for anybody that's seen it, the therapist that's in the film, her name is Gail Wilson-Liu. And I was her student many moons ago, like 13 years ago, back in graduate school. And she really emphasized the emotional and psychological impact that stuttering can have on an individual. And she always said, when you're working with people who stutter, you're not just working with, the stuttering behaviors. That's very, very secondary. You're working with people and building confidence. And a lot of what she had to say really resonated with me on many different levels. And I had never made a film before. I never went to film school. In fact, my training was, I pretty much became a filmmaker from filming weddings and events, which teach you a lot about documentary films, but it's not filmmaking per se. And I was just sitting in the back of her class and I thought, wow, this is a pretty impactful subject. This might make a great film.
I actually, as a person who stutters, John, I really found it interesting how the people that participated in the film were so forthright and honest about the challenges related to stuttering. And so how did you encourage this, or was it just a natural progression of more the people became more comfortable, they just shared? Because it was a really interesting to hear the lived experiences, because
Yeah.
I find, and Katelyn's finding as well, that we're learning so much about stuttering. There's so much to know about it, and the more we hear about lived experiences, my jaw drops all the time. So how did you encourage this sharing?
Well, I wish I could tell you, Greg, that it was some journalistic expertise on my part. I really don't think that it is at all. I attribute it to the people, the participants coming in really ready to tell their stories. Um, it was a very low budget production, which meant that, I had to set up the entire, backdrop, the camera, the mic, and I was monitoring all that stuff and asking questions. And to kind of split your attention among all of those things and focus on the person you're talking to can be very difficult. But what I try to do is create space. I try to, be as good of a listener as I could. And that's what I did on my end. But really, I think it's people who just came in ready to tell their story, ready to share with the world. This is what stuttering has meant in my life, both good, bad. And as a result, I thought a lot of it was just so honest and revelatory. And you wouldn't have a film unless people were that vulnerable. So I got really lucky.
You see, with me as a person who stutters, I'm finding, John, that the more that I talk about my own lived experiences, the more that I realize it's more of like a healing, cathartic experience. Because the more that you're learning to accept it, especially the below the surface of the iceberg, the emotional component, which unfortunately is often sort of ignored, especially in speech therapy. And John, as a speech pathologist, what's your feeling about the low below the surface of the iceberg, the emotional component, and how do you normally address it or during therapy?
Yeah, well, it's a dynamic process and it depends on the individual. But I'm thinking right now of a young child who comes to me. They're in kindergarten or first grade. Maybe they're around the age of 5 or 6, and there's some reported stuttering. And the kid comes to you, and they are these robust, happy communicators that stutter sometimes. Now, the normal instinct among speech pathologists is to, in those moments when they stutter, stop them, tell them that they're doing something wrong, and to do something differently so that they don't stutter. And I believe that in doing that, inadvertently, you can create a self-conscious child, whereas before there was a very confident child that just stuttered sometimes. So my approach to it is I want them to say what they want, when they want, whether or not they stutter. And if they stutter, I want them to do so confidently. So if a child comes in and they're robust and confident, my job is to keep them there. It's not to get rid of stuttering. It's not the abatement of stuttering. Um, if stuttering happens to be something that's very struggled for them, I'd like to make the process less struggled. But 100% fluency is never the goal. Effective communication is the goal, even if the kid stutters sometimes. And teaching that self-acceptance means a lot at an early age. Teaching the parents how to set their kid up for positive experiences at home is very important. And just remembering that as a speech pathologist, that kid thinks that you know everything about stuttering. So if you tell them that it's okay to stutter, that it's okay to do that thing that they do sometimes, they tend to believe you, and you can develop these really robust, confident communicators. So that's my philosophy.
I'm wondering if Katelyn has anything to add, knowing that she's an aspiring speech pathologist.
I don't have anything to add. That was just like amazing. Put everything that I kind of would like to implement in the future into words, basically. That was really awesome.
Oh, thank you. It's something that, Katelyn, you're starting out on your journey as becoming a speech pathologist. It's taken me a long time to kind of clarify my thoughts on all this. And as both of you know at this point, there's just so many polarized differences in the world of stuttering. People who just believe vehemently one way, and that's the only way. And there's people on the other side of the spectrum that are like, no, it's got to be this way. And I feel like we need to kind of embrace all approaches and choose eclectically based on what's best for the client that we're working with. But when I was in graduate school, I mean, I'm sure that I didn't even begin to have the understanding of stuttering that you have. Even though I had a fantastic teacher, it took me years to figure out even what I know right now.
Learning from people who stutter makes all the difference. Like hearing these lived experiences, which I'm getting to do on this podcast, which is awesome.
That's right, 100%. You're so wise for doing that.
You had mentioned in during the virtual conference for the NLSA that you use humor in your therapy sessions. Could you elaborate on that, John? Which was interesting. That
Yeah, it's I there 25% of my therapy is probably shenanigans. Making the kids laugh, giving them a reason to come back. And yeah, it is a little bit, to entice them to want to come to speech, but it's also to send the message that communication's fun. Communication isn't supposed to be hard work and remembering to use this modification technique in this moment, and talking all of a sudden becomes this list of things you have to do. It's fun and it's dynamic. And I don't just give them the opportunity to have fun. I model having fun with my own communication, because that's what I'd like to have them have in the world. Ultimately, communication can be fun. It should be fun. And so that's mostly why I use humor. And quite frankly, for me, it just helps the time pass a little bit better too.
do you think? I mean, like I'm thinking back to my history as well because I've taken speech therapy because I used to have a severe speech impediment, John, and I still do. And as we know, stuttering is so fluid, and depending how one is feeling, if one is stressed out, and how anxious one is feeling. But do you feel that like fluency is a bad word? I think it is because in my earlier therapy that a lot of emphasis was placed on fluency. The trend now is towards management. What's your opinion on this?
I think there's a big part of me that agrees with you, but my philosophy has shifted these days to values-centered therapy. So, for example, if I'm working with an older client who seeks to become fluent, my first words to them are going to be, okay, I respect that goal, and there are things that we can do toward, working toward greater fluency. However, it's important to know all those other elements of, communication that can come into the process: communication apprehension, the fear of speaking. All of those things are, all of those factors are things that you can't account for right now that could potentially affect your fluency in the moment. So maybe rather than going for 100% fluency, maybe we should again shift the conversation to communication. So I can become, if I have a lot of tension and struggle in the stuttering process that I have, because everybody's different. Some people develop tensions over time. If I take the tension out of it and I stutter more easily, that's fantastic. But I still have to reconcile with the fact that stuttering is going to happen from time to time. And when it does, I need to believe that it's not a big deal. I need to know that the world around me, for the most part, is going to embrace me in those moments, because people can develop a mindset where they think the world is somehow going to laugh at them, it's going to judge them. And it's true, some people are going to, no matter what, they're going to judge you negatively. But the vast majority of people out there are very accepting of differences. And it's just kind of convincing somebody that that's the case. Let's learn some acceptance in those moments. And if you want to work toward fluency, maybe what we can change the conversation to is less struggled stuttering so that you can communicate better as opposed to 100% fluency. Just one other thing I'm going to add to that. I often tell them people that are quote unquote 100% fluent are not necessarily good communicators, right? Could think of tons and tons of people who are fluent and they aren't good communicators. Well, I personally, knowing a lot of people who stutter and stutter boldly and stutter actively in their speech, I know tons of people like that that are very powerful communicators. Like they will move audiences with their speech. So it's kind of decoupling stuttering from effective communication and also from fluency. Fluency doesn't mean you're going to be an effective communicator. And just because you stutter, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be an effective communicator.
As a speech language pathologist, what would you feel, are some of the obstacles for treatment for clients? I mean, when can you tell? And this is a hard question to ask, but when do you feel someone is ready for treatment?
Well, there's different kinds of treatment. I think that whenever stuttering is identified, one can go in with indirect treatment, meaning you can talk to the parents about what they can do at home. For example, parents monitoring their own rate of speech. Like there's a really good story. Dale Williams from my film, he's the guy who tells the Julie story with the telephone and everything. He's a pretty funny guy. I was at a National Stuttering Association convention workshop where he was just, giving a speech. And afterwards, this big hulking dad, he must have had like a New York accent. He's like, "Hey, Dr. Williams, how you doing? Good to see you." He's like, "This guy over here, this Dr. Williams is fantastic. At an early age, he told me to talk to my child like I was Mr. Rogers. And I did that. And it made all the difference in the world." What's encapsulated in that story right there is that maybe this guy was talking aggressively, maybe he was talking super fast, and telling a parent, "Look, let's set your child up for a positive experience here. Maybe you can slow down your rate a little bit. Certainly listen to the content of what they're saying. Congratulate them on what they're saying, whether they stutter or not. But certainly in those moments where a disfluency occurs, let's tell them, I love the way you said that. I love the word that you chose." And I'll tell parents to actively do that 15 times a day. And if there's any bullying going on in the home, that needs to be snuffed out immediately. You want to make fun of a kid's shoes, you want to make fun of their haircut, that's fine. We don't make fun of stuttering. So even though it's not directly working with the child on their stuttering or their speech per se, it's optimizing the communication environment around them at an early age that can be really important. So that is also a form of therapy. It's just indirect therapy. So whenever I find out about a kid that's stuttering, that's actually one of my first protocols. And that's what I advise a lot of other speech pathologists to do. Let's make the world around them a little bit more accommodating. Set them up for success.
Definitely, John. Like in terms of the parental supports, what do you feel the parents need as well? Because sometimes I feel that parents are often left behind in therapy, and so they need the support as well. So what would you suggest, or what do you normally do as a therapist?
Well, that's one of the first phone calls that I make, or one of the first meetings that I plan. If I find out that a kid stutters, I will try to either talk with the parent on the phone or even have them come into the school during non-pandemic times. And we'll sit down and we'll essentially have a counseling session where I will tell them, okay, this is what stuttering is to the best of my knowledge. There are people that are vastly successful and they stutter. And of course, now here in the United States, we have Joe Biden, who is a person who stutters. Everybody knows that. And he's the president of the United States. So the sky's the limit. So this is not going to hold your child back. So automatically just telling a parent that can put them at ease. Now you tell them, here's what you can do at home to help. This is what's helpful. Again, monitoring your own rate of speech, speaking calmly, not speaking quickly with the expectation that they answer just as quickly. not asking 3 questions in a clip, but how about 1 question and then creating space for that child to answer that question. Again, complimenting them frequently on their speech. These are the things that I like to tell parents. And then just also let them know, look, we have an open door policy. If you have any questions about stuttering, if you have any questions about your child stuttering, please feel free to come in and ask me. But the last thing that we want to do here is ever tell our child not to stutter. Frequently, the things that are said out there are, stop, stop stuttering, or you just need to breathe. Take a deep breath in, and if you breathe, you're going to be okay. Look, if the kid is alive, he's breathing. Trust me. And then think before you talk. It's like, trust me, your kid. You're, as far as I know, your kid's gifted. I've met some incredibly intelligent young people who stutter. I'm like, thinking is not the issue. This kid's going to think circles around a lot of his classmates. So just dispelling a lot of those other thoughts, the stop, breathe, think thing. Let's get rid of that because that doesn't help. That doesn't help. Here's what does help. And giving them that list of things. And I'm telling you, sometimes that makes all the difference in the world, that conversation right there. And again, that's all indirect treatment. I haven't even begun necessarily working with that kid.
And I'm thinking as well that many parents of children who stutter feel guilty. They did something wrong. What's your thoughts about that? The guilt, which is and then the person who stutters, a child, feels that guilt.
Well, that's 100% right. The thing is, we don't know 100% what causes stuttering. And you never really know what's going on in somebody's home. What I do know is that there are plenty of kids out there that don't stutter, that come from really tough homes, things that are not ideal, possibly even abusive households. Conversely, I know a lot of kids who do stutter, who come from really, really wonderful homes where the parents and the people around them are loving, they're supportive. It's, again, just kind of, there's no evidence that the way that being abusive to a child or even pointing out the stuttering necessarily causes them to stutter. It's the diagnostic theory of stuttering. That's something that was basically put to rest many years ago. And it used to go like this: if you call out stuttering, if you say that is stuttering, then all of a sudden the child can become self-conscious and you can induce stuttering in the child. In fact, we found out that that's not the case. So since we know so little about what causes stuttering, we can't squarely put our fingers on a parent and say, hey, you caused this. So again, it's telling them, let's not worry so much about what the cause is right now. Let's just focus on the fact that they can be successful in life. They can be successful communicators. And here's what you can do to help, which I know is an imperfect answer, but until science tells us that parents are squarely to blame for this, you can tell them, hey, you don't have to blame yourself. But here's what you can do to help.
And Katelyn, do you have any questions for John? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing, because in the future, I hope to also do my master's in counseling. I've said this on the podcast a bunch of times, so anybody who's listening for like multiple episodes is probably going to be sick of that. But that's what I hope to do, because I feel like, just personally, I feel like SLPs aren't necessarily trained in like counseling techniques to the extent that they should be. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Like, do you think that there should be more of an emphasis put on training? Because there's people who are just in their nature, as like in their personalities, going to be able to implement sort of counseling techniques, I guess, into their therapies, like you said you do quite frequently. But there's people who without training probably can't do that. And so do you think there should be maybe more emphasis put on that?
Yeah, that is a good question and a really fantastic point. I teach counseling for SLPs at Cal State LA. And one of the biggest things that comes up is teaching people how to actively listen. That there's two parts to the communication model. And so oftentimes we are programmed to teach, to instruct, and to guide. But also the aspect of just listening to difficulty that person might have had in that day, letting them vent, listening to a parent who's concerned. That's such an important element of counseling. And it's the more humanistic element of counseling. Um, the type of counseling that I like to do is less directive. It's less about here's what you absolutely have to do. And it's more about what's inside of you, what feels right. And then after that, sure, I'll give them some advice. But I think that counseling is essential to stuttering therapy. It's absolutely essential. And I can't comment on why there's not a greater emphasis put on it. Statistically, we know that outcomes are much, much better if there's a stronger therapeutic alliance, client-clinician relationship. And since that is the case, it's how does one make that happen? How does one bring that into being? And that is through, a counseling relationship, learning how to connect with somebody. And you bring up a really good point of some people are naturally just very good at it. They're naturally good listeners. They're naturally very empathetic. And then there's some people that aren't. And I think there's a little bit of a debate as to whether or not somebody who is not humanistically programmed can learn how to do that effectively. I say that there's a certain level of talent that's needed in our field. And a lot of times graduate schools focus on academic rigor. How good of grades does this person have? And then that's why they get in. And that is certainly part of the equation. But the other thing we need to be asking is, how good are this person's interpersonal skills? How good are they with other human beings? But if we assume that everybody can be taught, and I think to a certain degree we can, certain things like just knowing to listen, knowing to back off on your end and give that person space, just introducing somebody to that very elemental concept. And then also just teaching all the different modalities of counseling. Here's how you can help people. You can be indirect. You can be a little bit more direct. You can change perhaps flawed thinking in people, or you can at least introduce new ideas into their world. That's all counseling. But I think in order for us to be the most effective counselors, as opposed to one class in undergraduate or perhaps one class in graduate school, wherever it happens, we'd probably need more like 3. There's a type of counseling called motivational interviewing, where essentially you look for the motivation in that client to do whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. So the question isn't, you've come to therapy, now let me bestow upon you what I think you need. It's, no, you've come to therapy, you have some needs. Why don't you tell me what those are based on your value system? And then we're going to work with you based on what you want, because that's where true motivation comes from. And I think an entire class could be taught on that.
John, I'm wondering now that there's some questions about the co-relationship. If we realize that a lot of speech therapists do not have the training, unfortunately, and it's no fault of their own. It's just the system. But do you think, like referring person starters to psychiatrists, psychologists, working together as a team, the SLP, person who stutters, psychiatrists, psychologists, does that relationship work, or would the benefits, pros and cons to it?
I think it can work, but again, Greg, it gets back to the person. Who is that psychologist? Because we as speech pathologists have a certain amount of training that they certainly are not privy to. And we have a valid role as counselors. So I feel that with the level of expertise we have in communication, coupled with the fact that we can counsel, we are probably some of the best people to counsel. Having said that, there are scores of people who stutter who have seen empathetic, wonderful counselors who don't know much about the speech process at all, but they're fantastic listeners. They've emboldened these people who stutter to go out into the world and be the best version of themselves, whether they stutter or not. And these are all the things that I'd ever want to get across in counseling anyway. So I really think it depends on the level of empathy, the listening skills in that person, and their humanistic skills. Whether that exists in a psychologist or in a speech pathologist, I think those kinds of people can be very effective in working with people who stutter.
When you mentioned that you're recommending more courses within the postgraduate program on stuttering. Where do you start to initiate that? Because I actually support the so much, because I think there should be more courses taught on stuttering and the below the surface of the iceberg. But where do you start to advocate for that, for universities to hear it, listen to it?
That's a fantastic question, Greg. And am I advocating for this also because I want a full-time position at the university? Perhaps, maybe I'm just trying to create more of a job for myself over there. But no, in all reality, I think one has to draw a connection between those kinds of counseling skills lead to effective clinicians. And people in our field really pay attention to data. And I think more data, more research perhaps needs to occur in those areas. And then that needs to be brought to a university. So it's like, look, you have all of these classes, you have this myriad of classes, and you are certainly teaching students a lot about how to effectively work with people with a range of communication disorders. And that's fantastic. However, the single thing that's going to help them the most is counseling skills. So how about at the very least, we add another counseling class? We have 2 of those. So I think for people, it's going to be data. I think it's going to be a direct line drawn from, those kinds of skills make for the most effective clinicians. And also I do some very sneaky things. In my graduate level class, I teach a lot of counseling. I talk counseling every single day, and we spend a period of time talking about counseling. Now, most of those students, or at least some of those students, have already had me for the counseling class in undergrad. But I do make it a point to talk about how those skills are essential. But convincing universities, who have budgetary constraints, maybe the best thing, now that I'm thinking about it, would be for everybody to embed a little bit of that pretty much in every single course that they have. If you're talking about dysphagia, swallowing disorders, if you're talking about a general language class, if you're talking about articulation, perhaps counseling should be infused into every single one of those classes as an essential and effective way of working with people. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be another discrete class. It just needs to be part of what somebody learns to be an effective clinician.
One of the challenges the Newfoundland Labrador Stuttering Association is realizing now and trying to acknowledge it. I really appreciate you bring up the data component, John, because the NLSA has done an excellent job of trying to raise awareness, understanding, and acceptance of stuttering. But which is great, and that's half the battle. But now we realize that it's time to gather data within Newfoundland Labrador, and so we're working with Dr. Paul De Decker, who is an associate professor of linguistics at Memorial University,
Wow.
and which is a mouthful for a person who stutters. And so we're also sort of working with a number of stakeholders. This is called the NLSA Solidarity Collaborative Stakeholder Project. So we're very fortunate to have Dr. De Decker working with us. But so what we've started to do, and just to backtrack a bit, when myself and another board member, Allison O'Brien, which you know, Allison, when we went to promote the NLSA, one question always came up: Allison, Greg, what data do you have to identify that there are deficits in Newfoundland, Labrador, and do you know the numbers of people who stutter? So we realize that we really need this data to really sort of advocate with levels of government. Yes, this is the evidence that there is deficits in treatment and services, and this is evidence that other services need to be incorporated into the various levels of government services and programs. So so what we've done, we have developed 4 surveys, which will be going out to the province. That's one for SLPs, one for parents who stutter, people who stutter, and for teachers. And but you know, I agree that the NLSA have done a lot of work in terms of raising awareness. But I'm wondering if people are listening, or people at levels of government, people are listening. That's the problem. So once we get this data, then we will be able to look at it and sort of dig down and see what next. What is our next step? Do you know? Do you have any suggestions for us as we move forward?
You know, I'm just, first of all, I think it's impressive that you are doing that and you realize the importance of it. And I think the more data you gather, obviously, you know, the better. Getting governmental agencies, and also I'm going to throw corporate America in there, is a challenge. This is a slight shift in topic, but at one point, Starbucks had a couple of incidents where they had baristas who made fun of people who stutter. And they, you know, somebody went in and said, "My name is David." And the barista wrote David on the cup, you know, which is extremely offensive. And it happened a couple times within like about, you know, a year. And I got to imagine that those things, not just at Starbucks, but within a lot of corporations, happen from time to time. You know, I don't even know if that qualifies as a microaggression. That's just a flat out macroaggression. It's a pretty serious way to offend somebody who stutters. Anyway, I reached out to Starbucks, you know, and I told them, hey, you know, these things happened. If you'd like to train your baristas to be a little bit more sensitive, you know, here's what I have in mind. I could provide a few words. I have this film, and you can get the entire training done in an hour and a half. And ultimately, what they came back at me with was, it's not this is basically what they wrote. It's not a big enough of an issue to them. There's not enough people who stutter for that to for it to matter. So they said they've been focusing a lot more on deaf and hard of hearing, but the numbers didn't seem to make sense to them, since the prevalence of stuttering, the incidence of stuttering, is so low. So I guess getting people to invest, but you know, when you start talking numbers, 1% of the entire world is 70 million people. How is it that 70 million people wouldn't be important to a corporation? So again, getting through to these governmental agencies and these in corporate America is a challenge, but these people do listen to data, they listen to numbers, and oftentimes they're very reactive. They wait until something bad happens and then they do something about it. And that's probably the wrong method, but trying to be preemptive in one's approach with them is also difficult too, because I think they're just working on a lot of things. I know there's a lot of diversity and inclusion departments in corporate America right now. So I know they're definitely trying to get more sensitive. And I know people working in big banking right now that are advocating for more understanding about stuttering. It's just happening very slowly. And we're all kind of trying to answer the very question that you asked me: how do we better get across to these agencies, these governmental agencies, and to corporate America. The question is, I don't fully know. It's just we need to keep our efforts up.
Thank you, John, for that. Katelyn, do you have a question for John? Another question?
Yeah, it's just my favorite question to ask anybody who is doing SLP. What made you want to do speech pathology in the first place when you started?
Oh, that's a good question. I gotta say, I gotta give credit to my mom. You know, you never listen to your mom, right? Hey, I don't know about your mothers, but my mom used to give about 100 pieces of advice a day. You should do this. You should do that. You should do this. And after a while, it just kind of becomes, background. It's like, you know, your mother loves you. She cares about you, but mom, I can't possibly do all of that. But there was a time when there was a great level of discontent in my life. I had moved out here to Los Angeles to become an actor. And that business, as exciting as it can be, can also be very soul sucking, And I woke up many days literally looking in the mirror saying, what are you doing? How does your existence benefit humanity? Nothing is coming of this acting. And even if it did, what are you really doing? I had those questions, and it's not to besmirch the people who act out there or the profession of acting. It just wasn't for me. And right around that time, my mom said, well, my friend Diane, because every mom has a friend named Diane. She she thinks that you'd be really good at speech pathology. She has really enjoyed this profession, and you should try it. So I started, looking it up on the internet, and the job prospects looked pretty good. And it seemed like something I could enjoy doing. But I got to tell you that once I actually got into it, I got lucky, because I didn't know how much I was going to love it, how much of a part of me it really was. I think I got into it for practical reasons, and I thought, well, this is going to be certainly an upgrade in my life. I didn't think it was going to become my life. I didn't think it was going to be something that was so exciting. It was going to give me the sense of purpose that it has. So really, I enjoy all this because I listened to my mom.
That was an interesting question, Katelyn. And just to do a follow-up question to what Katelyn asked you, John, with your experience with people who stutter, when you meet a person who stutters, who's not too sure what to do with their life, or where to go, or what career path, what would your answer, or your sort of guidance would be? Now, the reason why I'm asking that, when I was growing up in Gander, Newfoundland, and my parents always sort of planted the seed that Greg O'Grady, Greg is from a Catholic family. There's always one person in the family targeted to be the priest of the family. So they planted a seed in my head to be a priest. And as a person who stutters, I actually work with that idea. The reason why is that because because people around us, the community, knew that Greg was going to be a priest. Greg worked that angle, because I didn't have to talk that much, because I knew I stuttered, and people wouldn't expect me to talk. They purposely thought I was always praying, whatever. But but I found that it's so unfair when you're heading in one direction, but then you're fumbling around. So to make a long story short, have you experienced with that with other people who are struggling to find their place in life?
Well, yeah, I there's a lot of thoughts come to mind about that. So I think for at least some people who stutter, it's, I would do this, but I stutter. I would like to engage in this profession, but I stutter. So it's the element of stuttering that is keeping them from following their dreams. So there's this thing in counseling, and it's, I don't even know that it belongs to any particular modality of counseling, but you may have heard of it. It's called the miracle question. So you just ask somebody, what would you do if your stuttering magically went away tomorrow morning? What would your life be like? What would you want to do? And then they usually give you a pretty full description. And then after they give you that lovely detailed description of what they do in life, you inform them, what if I told you that everything you just mentioned, you can accomplish, you can do, even if you stutter? And then you sometimes start to see light bulbs go on. You mean I could still be a lawyer and stutter? You mean I could still be an actor and stutter? You mean I could still be a TV personality and stutter? Yes, 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 and yes. Absolutely. Sky's the limit. There's nothing that's going to hold you back. I mean, if you wanted to be an engineer working for NASA, the only thing that's going to hold you back is how good are you at math and physics. It's certainly not going to be your stuttering, because I know somebody who stutters who works for NASA. So I think, again, just kind of changing the narrative in somebody's mind. Stuttering doesn't have to be that I would do something, but I stutter. You can get rid of the but I stutter. I can do this thing and I stutter. So it's changing but to and, because the two can coexist.
John, this is the first time I've heard the miracle question. Never heard that before, never. And it makes sense. Katelyn, do you think so? Makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. No, John. You had mentioned at the conference that you have another film coming out now. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, or did I hear right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm working on this film. It's coming along very slowly. Again, I have a team of people helping me on this, but in terms of the skills of putting the film together, I'm the guy. So it's coming together slowly but surely. It's basically the premise of the film is to teach people, whoever they are, speech pathologists, parents, anybody concerned, how to set children who stutter up for positive experiences. Something that I had mentioned, earlier in our conversation here. It's something that I try to do in therapy. It turns out that there's a place called Camp Shoutout in Muskegon, Michigan. And it's run by Julie Rayner and Kristen Camella, two really wonderful women. They're both speech pathologists. Kristen Camella is a world-renowned speech pathologist. And they've created this really special place where kids can go and explore communication. They have tons of positive communication experiences every single day. They meet other kids who stutter, and it's just a whole hell of a lot of fun. It's camp, for crying out loud. So it's trying to take everything that happens at that camp and boil it down into engaging and consumable lessons that anybody can learn and potentially apply to their child. But a lot of it is predicated upon setting them up for success, because communication is fun. What kinds of ways would they like to challenge themselves? They can choose their own path. Again, getting back to like the motivational interviewing thing, what is in line with your beliefs, your values? What would you like to do? Instilling that in a kid in a very early age is important. And the outcome that you see when you meet kids who, they attended 10 years ago and now they're in their early 20s, you meet these young men and women who are, again, these really confident, poised communicators. They walk up to you. You can just kind of see the confidence in their body. Yeah, they still stutter, but they are just such powerful communicators. You can see what that camp has meant in their lives, what it's meant to the lives of their parents, and how it's kind of impacted the entire world around them. So, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a film that expresses all the sentiments that I just said, but also acknowledges that there's organizations all over the world that are essentially trying to do that same thing. With your organization out there, that these are goals that you have for your kids. How do we set them up for positive communication experiences? So embedded within the film, we're not trying to say, oh, this happens exclusively at Camp Shoutout, and if you want your kid to be a success in stuttering, they got to come to Camp Shoutout. It's like, no, this happens at Camp Shoutout, and these things happen in a lot of other organizations. And these are some of the things we do and that you can do too to set your kid up for positive experiences with stuttering or communication rather.
Well, that's great. When will the film be released, John? Are you close to releasing it, or?
You know, I've got probably about 25% of it done. And the hope is by 2022 to have it released. You know, it's going to depend. Certain things are going to really be important here. You know, we are trying to raise money for it. And we're going different routes right now. We haven't gone the crowdfunding route yet, like a Kickstarter or anything like that. We may do that. But we're kind of going, to angel investors right now. So, the sooner we get money, the more we can start working on things like animation and a lot of the post-production things we're going to need to do. So my hope is for early to mid 2022. Maybe this time next year, I'll tell you, I've got a complete film. But it's amazing anything ever gets done, Greg. It's seriously, films are so complicated, and there's so many things that can go right in the chain of events that leads to a finished product, that I'm hopeful that it's going to get finished, but there's just a lot of work and factors that need to occur before that day comes.
Uh, for uh, for our listeners, John, that would like to watch When I Stutter, where would they access it? When I
Oh,
Stutter.
thank you, Greg. Yeah, if they go to whenistutter.com, they can go there, and it's there's just a couple of links away. You can watch the film on Vimeo. It's available on Vimeo. It's actually available for free on Canopy. So most people through their public libraries have access to Canopy, and they can just watch it at home through an app for free. And there's some people who just like a good old fashioned DVD or Blu-ray, and I also sell it that way. No VHS is available at this time, or Betamax. Greg, we'd know it. Katelyn, you probably, I don't even know if you know what that stuff is, but
No,
trust me,
I do.
yeah, it was an inferior form of media, but it dominated my youth. We used to tape everything. So yeah.
Well, John, I mean, thanks a lot for your time today. It's been excellent, and as I mentioned before, with every guest, we learn so much about stuttering, and then stuttering is I mean, there's there's definitely so much more to learn about it. It really is. Katelyn, do you have any last questions for?
None that I could think of that wouldn't open a whole other can of worms. That was just I've learned so much from this already. This has been amazing.
Well, it's a
Okay.
big honor to create this space and allow me to come in here and communicate with you guys. And again, I feel like I've made some new friends, even though I've never been to Newfoundland. It's new, and I don't. Am I even saying that correctly?
Well, years, it's always a mix metaphor, whatever. When I was growing up, we always call it Newfoundland, but people call it
Newfoundland.
Newfoundland. So I'm not too sure how it's pronounced. So whatever you feel comfortable with.
I'll go with you.
Newfoundland.
Newfoundland, yeah.
It's
So we
almost
used to
like
do
New
growing up.
Finland, but like different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been corrected a couple of times, and it's like somebody's like, no, it's Newfoundland, it's Newfoundland. So I'm gonna go, so Newfoundland. I'll be in the clear here if I say Newfoundland.
Newfoundland would be okay. Yeah. Do you think so? Okay.
Yeah, I know. It's so
I
hard.
don't know. Yeah. It is hard, yeah. It is hard, God. But John, thanks a lot, and the best of luck with the new film, and thanks again for making the film When I Stuttered, because I mean this has been a real eye opener, and a great great education and and awareness for people who stutter in the public. So thanks again, and I'm sure we'll have you back.
Thank you. It'd be my honor. Appreciate it.
Some Stutter La, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering, has so much to talk about. Let's start listening.
This has been an episode of Some Stutter La, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering. Some Stutter La is hosted and produced by Greg O'Grady, Katelyn Mayo, Dr. Paul Decker, and Luca Dinu. Some Stutter La is available on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. To ask a question, send us a comment or suggestion, or just get in touch, find us at or online at Some Stutter Podcast on Instagram or Some Stutter La Pod on Facebook. Thanks for listening.